We are joined today by Peter Lawton, who has held every conceivable role in Moriah since joining 3 decades ago, more even. And today he is the keeper of the secrets. And we are happy to be joined today by Peter Lawton to talk about Moriah's history, to talk about some of the milestones that he has witnessed in his association with Kehilat Moriah. So welcome, Peter, to From the Carmel. This is Moriah.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
How did Moriah come about?
I would say almost by accident. It all started with a South African, a Dutchman, an American, and an Englishman. It sounds like the start of a joke, but this is deadly serious. The four gentlemen were sitting around the bridge table, and towards the end of the evening, they had a break for refreshments when they were joined by their wives. And this was at the end of August 1955. And naturally, the conversation turned towards the upcoming high holidays. And some of them expressed their disappointment that they couldn't find a synagogue in which they felt comfortable. Bear in mind, this is 1955. I would imagine all of them had come to Israel since the founding of the state only 7 years earlier. They'd been used to very different synagogues in the diaspora, many of them liberal synagogues of one denomination or another. And in particular, the wives were saying how uncomfortable they felt sitting behind a barrier or on an upper floor. What went from there?
Now, this must have been a very brave step that these people took, because obviously, as you mentioned, conservative Judaism, Masorti Judaism, was not something that was very prevalent in Israel in those days. And here they are trying to start something revolutionary. So how, from your knowledge and from the information that you've gathered throughout the years, how did the Israeli society in general, how did Haifa react to the fact that there was an egalitarian minyan taking shape and form in Haifa?
Israeli society then was very different to what it is today. It was still very much, I would almost say, the 12 tribes with no unifying factor at that stage. There were European synagogues, and there were Yemenite synagogues, and there were Iraqi synagogues and North African synagogues. But the overall religious establishment felt then, just like today, that liberal Judaism, or Masorti Judaism, as it later became, was definitely a threat. We have newspaper cuttings from the after Rosh Hashanah, particularly after Yom Kippur, where the religious establishment were declaring their opposition to this new congregation that was just set up. Even then they felt Moriah was a threat.
And to your knowledge, did the general population in Haifa take to the fact that there was suddenly an egalitarian, or not an egalitarian way, in a minyan in the way that we think about it today, but a mixed minyan taking shape in Haifa?
Absolutely. We have reports that over 200 people turned up to the high holiday services, particularly on Yom Kippur, but I think there was a large number on Rosh Hashanah as well. From that bridge game, word spread from mouth to ear, and a lot of people came because they were looking for something like Moriah.
Okay, so those early days when they celebrated, basically they were looking for a place to celebrate the holidays. How did they sustain themselves from that point moving on?
The next major decision was to hold regular Shabbat services. There were a small number of people within the central nucleus of the congregation, amongst the founding fathers, who had experience of leading services. Um, One of them, who joined a little bit later, had been a Torah leader in the Red Army during before he came on Aliyah from what was then the Soviet Union. They had, and so they started having regular services, originally in in families' houses. They later moved to the Reali school, very close to our current site, and that's where they used to have services every Shabbat, every holiday. And in fact, we've come round full circle, because in the recent wars of the last 2.5 years, when Haifa's been under rocket attack, we have, and our own building is not suitable. We have gone back to the Reali school and hold our services there.
Hold that thought, Peter, because we'll talk about the current period in Moriah's history, current history. But you mentioned the fact that they were in people's homes, and obviously they began to grow. First of all, describe the neighborhood that we're in today. We'll kind of give it in general terms. Achuza is one of the major neighborhoods in Haifa. But back then, 1955, 1960, what was this neighborhood like?
It was a neighborhood of immigrants, mainly from Europe. It was then, as of today, one of the better off neighborhoods of Haifa. But it was very, very far from what it is today. For instance, in those days, there was a large Egged garage very close to us, where today there's a shopping mall.
And still, in those early days, the major attraction of Moriah was for, I mean, you intimate that, where it was towards immigrants who came either from Europe or from North America or from other English-speaking countries. So where were the points of interaction between the general Israeli, the Sabras, or other immigrant groups, and Moriah?
Firstly, the major influx of North American immigrants to Moriah was not until the 1970s, after the Six-Day War. Let's not forget, in 1955, there were very, very few Sabras. The vast majority, some 70-80% of Israel's population had moved here after 1948.
Right. So let's talk about the building that we're in right now. This has been the home of Kehilat Moriah since 1965, plus minus. So 10 years after the Kehilah was founded. How did what's the history of this building, and how did Moriah come about to get here?
Moriah moved in here in 1962. Prior to that, even before the Second World War, the building had been a sanatorium for patients recovering from tuberculosis. That is one of the reasons that we have such large windows. The windows could be opened to allow the patients have fresh air. Some of the patients who were in better condition could go out and walk on the grounds roundabout. It was never envisaged, I don't think, the building would last until the 21st century.
And when there's a history, there's a history, as you say, this building existed long before Kehilat Moriah came in here. There's a history that talks about what this building served as during the British Mandate, for instance. That there was an underground weapons munition. Is that a real fact, or is that as they say, Torah shebe'al peh?
I have only heard it by hearsay. We haven't found any evidence of it. But on the other hand, we haven't conducted any extensive archaeological excavation. Maybe one day we will.
Well, I don't think we will, but someone will, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they find, what they're able to dig up. You mentioned that the building, and we're sitting right now in the sanctuary, and the people who are seeing you are seeing the beautiful windows that you were referring to. This building also had some metamorphoses in throughout the years. Describe again from you said the 60s 70s when there was a bigger influx of aliyah from America. How did that change the face and structure and the fiber of Kehilat Moriah?
Well, since the 70s, I would say Moriah has become, with ups and downs, a very American-dominated community.
Is that because most of the immigration came from North America?
Most of the immigration came from North America. There was an attempt for, say, 25 years, I would say, from the early 1990s till 6-7 years ago, to make Moriah more appealing to settlers, to the native Israeli community. I think in the last 5 or 6 years, the circle has turned again. And today, Moriah has a very large American majority.
Now, let's go back to the period that you came. You joined Kehilat Moriah what year?
1993.
In 1993, what kind of a congregation did you find? How different was it from the Judaism that you experienced in your home country in the United Kingdom, in England?
Firstly, okay, it was partly different. I'd grown up in a Reform community in London, but we were always told that the British Reform movement was far closer to the American conservative movement than to the American Reform movement. Moriah wasn't that different. When I came on Aliyah, no, even further back, I was at the time of my bar mitzvah. There was start of talking about the egalitarianism. I remember one of my close friends at the time was bar mitzvah caused a raucous in London because his mother was allowed to open the ark. Nothing more than that. No reading, no anything. That was the first time that in our Reform synagogue, a lady had taken any sort of leading position. I joined Moriah a month after the decision to start the process of making the congregation egalitarian.
Let me ask you a question about that, because obviously when you came, what you're saying is that the congregation was not fully egalitarian. I'm assuming that there was mixed seating, but that women did not take an active role in leading services, reading from the Torah, etc. So how did the congregation take the decision to become what I would call, or what I refer to as, a fully egalitarian Shivyoni minyan, or congregation?
The decision that was taken in January 1993 was to make Moriah a fully egalitarian congregation. The practice was gradual and took almost 10 years. Really? It was very, very gradual. There were a lot of the older members who were very opposed to it. Members from all backgrounds, including North American. The first thing that happened, there had always been mixed seating, The first thing that happened was that women would read from the Torah, and that women would read from the Torah. That was the first. That was the first step that was taken. After that, women were allowed to have aliyot Torah. Women became shlichot tzibur. They were allowed to lead the services. And I think the final stage was when women were counted as part of the minyan.
Why, in your estimation, did it take so long to fully transition to a fully egalitarian minyan?
Because Moriah is conservative with both the capital C and the small c.
Okay. And you say that some of the members at the time did not take very kindly to this move. How did it affect the social fabric of Moriah?
Firstly, unfortunately, there were a number of families who couldn't accept it at all, and they left. Some immediately, some much later. Socially, it's very difficult for me to say because I didn't know Moriah before it was egalitarian. What I can say is that the rabbi at the time when I joined had just started or was just starting forming a group of young families, forming them into a social unit. And those families became the leadership of Moriah for probably the next 20 years at least. And what kept us together was the fact that we were nearly all immigrant families. Some come to Israel as a family, others, like our family. I met my wife here in Israel, and we brought up our family here. What was missing, what we were missing, particularly on Shabbatot and holidays, was the three generational family in which we could celebrate the holidays, and Moriah gave us a substitute for that.
I'd like to turn our attention for a second. We'll walk away from Moriah for just a minute. But Moriah was also very influential in forming the Masorti movement, the conservative movement here in Israel. Can you walk us through the steps, the people who wanted to have an organization, and why that was important back in the day to have a conservative movement form, and is it a testament or is it a feather in Moriah's cap that it actually germinated here in Haifa?
This was another result of the Aliyah from North America. The Masorti, the conservative movement in Israel, was founded in 1978 by largely North American immigrants from Haifa, members of Moriah, from Ashkelon, which in addition to a few North Americans had a very large British contingent, and from Omer, a small town very near to Beersheba in the south of the country, and of course also Jerusalem. And they got together, they realized that these were the congregations that existed in Israel at the time, and they wanted to unite under some sort of umbrella organization as they had been used to in the United States.
And what kind of a role did members of Moriah take in developing this organization? You could even name some of the early influencers in that regard.
Well, from Moriah, Josh Wiesen, who's still, despite the fact that he's soon going to be celebrating his 93rd birthday, still comes to Moriah every single Shabbat that he can. He was one of the founding fathers of the Masorti movement, and he took with him a native Israeli, Chaim Liskin, whose son comes regularly when every Shabbat that he possibly can, together with Chaim's grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Do you think that having a movement helps or detracts from the Masorti or from conservative synagogues or the ideal or the idea of conservative Judaism? Because I know that you are also involved with the movement on a national scale. So where does the intersection between conservative Judaism, if we can just zoom out a little for a second, the intersection between Israeli population and and conservative Masorti Judaism?
Having an umbrella organization like the Masorti movement helps in contacts with the outside world, particularly the establishment here in Israel. Obviously, the religious establishment want nothing to do with us at the moment. In the past, there has been limited cooperation. There was once a member of Moriah who was a member of the Haifa Rabbinical Council, but nearly all contact with the national establishment is conducted by the movement, whether it's lobbying in the Knesset for recognition or aid to non-orthodox religious organizations, whether it's negotiating with government ministries, though never the Ministry of Religious Affairs, for aid, or whether it's approaching Jews abroad.
Peter, you came here in 1993, and the transition, the Moriah was already beginning its process of becoming a fully egalitarian congregation. Did that, in your mind, also help attract a different type of audience? You mentioned before that it was primarily an Anglo-Saxon community. Did Israelis normalism. I mean, I want to say the word normal, but the Israelis who are more considered Sabras or not North American Jews or Anglo-Saxon Jews, did they start warming up and coming to Moriah, or is it still kind of this Anglo-Saxon type of enclave?
If not immediately, then certainly a little later on. Firstly, from 1992 till 2002, and then again from 2009 till 2018, we had Sabra rabbis appointed intentionally with the hope that they would attract young Israelis. The egalitarian process had helped because modern Orthodox women who were looking for egalitarianism, they were looking for an egalitarian congregation in which they could pray, in which they would be equal to the men, had nowhere else to look out from Maria.
And did that help bolster, I mean, you held leadership positions in the organization. I'm holding today a leadership position. Did that help bolster membership, or just, very, very particular inflection points that brought Israelis or run-of-the-mill Israelis into Moriah?
No, without question, it increased the number of our members. We were reaching groups that we hadn't reached previously.
Okay, now let's look at the last 20 years of Moriah. As we entered the new millennium, how different is Moriah from the Moriah that you joined in 1993 to the Moriah that is today? I'm allowing you to be softly critical, if we need to be critical.
When I joined Moriah in 1993, I almost turned around and walked out because in one of the first sermons that I heard, the rabbi of the time said to be a member of Moriah, you have to be American, you have to be an academic, and you have to be wealthy. And I was none of the three.
Okay, I don't think I would have qualified back then either. So okay.
And that has definitely changed. I think there we certainly have less academics. There are certainly we have connections. Many of our members are in the faculty of both Haifa University and the Technion, but not in the same numbers that there were then. The numbers of American during that period has fluctuated. I would say at the moment it's high. 10 years ago when I was chairman of Korea, I think the number of Americans is probably somewhere around 40%. I would say today it's probably somewhere between 70 and 80. And that's definitely felt in all our activities. One of the things that I'm very critical of the current leadership about is that at the end of the 20th century, there was a decision made that no matter what, all activities at Moriah would be held in Hebrew, all publications would be in Hebrew only. And the last couple of years, we've seen more and more what you would call English and I would call American coming in. One exception in the 1990s was that Moriah went to great effort to try and absorb the huge immigration from the former Soviet Union. We used to have one evening a week dedicated exclusively to these new immigrants. They had two lessons, one in easy Hebrew, one on basic Judaism because they knew nothing whatsoever about Judaism, with a meal in between, which also helped them a great deal that coming to a new country without a penny to their name, there was at least one meal a week to worry about.
So this is an interesting point that you're raising, Peter, because it actually shows the reactive nature of Kehilat Moriah to something that was occurring in Israel at the time, and that was the influx of immigration from the former Soviet Union. From where we are today, has that sustained itself? I mean, obviously, at the time, that was a really important project. It was something that one can say was even should have been on the mission statement. But has it sustained itself over time? And do you recognize today other immigrations, I would say, that Moriah could replicate that type of model to bring conservative Judaism closer to those communities?
I'm not sure that we could do. There are very, very few of those Russians who are still in contact with Moriah today. I would imagine, just if I remember the age of them, that very few of them are still alive. Sometimes their children come back and to celebrate their grandchildren's bat mitzvah, but on a regular basis, we don't see them. But Moriah has always been very, very active in helping new immigrants. The one community that never actually came to Moriah, but number individual members help with, and that's the Ethiopian community. They have their very own, very strong religious traditions, and Israeli society and Israeli establishment has respected that. But a number of our members have gone out of their way to help them.
One would say, though, that from a religious aspect, they are more in line with Orthodoxy than conservative Judaism. So, how, for instance, if would you work with the Ethiopian community in Israel in order to get them closer to Kehilat Moriah?
I'm really not sure that we can. I think they have their very, very own set religious ways, as you said yourself,
Hmm.
closer possibly to the Orthodox community, but again, totally foreign to them. When they first came, the Orthodox community didn't want anything to do with them either. They're very, very much a sect on their own. Peter, you said
Earlier in this conversation, and that is that one of the things that is lacking is generational continuity. And I think you and I are kind of victims of that same uh, gap in generational continuity. You and I both our children grew up here and moved away, and they come to visit once or twice a year or something like that, which is pretty much indicative of um, kids going out of the house and spreading their wings and going somewhere else. Is this something that you think is hurting Moria, or is this just something that's just a societal issue that we cannot overcome?
it's both. It's definitely hurting Moria. When you come into services in Moria, the average age is uncomfortably high, I would say. Um, it's part of Israeli society. Many of us came to Israel wanting to build um, a non-religious Jewish state, and that's what our children are putting into practice. I'm sure that for most, if I can go back to the group of young families that the previous rabbi formed in the 1990s, I'm sure if you speak to those who were then the children and who are now parents of both, the vast majority would say that Moriah is their synagogue that they don't go to.
So in essence, if we go back to Masorti Judaism in Israel as a an idea, the fact that with exception of Jerusalem, which is kind of a microcosm in itself, does conservative Judaism have a future here in Israel in your mind? If it does not have if you say Moriah cannot attract a younger generation to rejuvenate its ranks. So is the idea of egalitarian Judaism in Israel failing in your estimation?
I hope that Masorti Judaism in Israel has a future. Sometimes I believe it does, sometimes I believe it doesn't. The Masorti movement has recently appointed a new CEO who grew up in Moriah and has been very, very involved over the last 30 years or more in the education of the younger generation. And I really hope that he will bring his experience and skills to good use and will be able to attract those who's come across his work as an educator and bring them back into Masorti Judaism, whichever congregation, wherever they're living.
I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that the Masorti movement has this new CEO, and he's a product of Moriah, Rabbi Doron Rubin. He will be a guest on our show in a few weeks, so we're looking forward to talking to him and hearing his vision for Moriah. But Peter, in the few minutes that we have left, and this has been really a fascinating discussion with you, and I'm sure that we can continue it also in the future. What is your vision for Moriah? Say, if we had to put a time capsule today, bury it here in the ground or somewhere else and open it in 70 years, what would you like the people 70 years from now to know about Moriah in 2026? And what do you think that Moriah will look like in 70 years from now?
I have no idea what Malaya would look like in 70 years' time. I would like to think that maybe my great grandchildren will be involved in some way. I don't know. What would I put in a time capsule? I would certainly put a siddur and a chumash. It was quite obvious to everyone that our major activity was praying. I think I would add to that something that would represent the learning that goes on at Moriah. I would put in a green shirt representative of the Noam Youth Movement, the Israeli equivalent of USY, because over the years we've had a very, very active branch of Noam. And in fact, the first branch ever of Noam was there at Moriah, so that has to go in. I'm not sure exactly what, but something would have to go in to symbolize the fact that Moriah is an egalitarian community. Maybe an egalitarian siddur, even though we only use that on Erev Shabbat.
Any closing thoughts about where you, when you're looking at 70 years of Moriah, what you think the major accomplishment of this congregation has been in those years?
To build an alternative house of prayer and to help in the welcoming of new immigrants over the years from all countries, particularly from Europe and North America, but from everywhere.
Peter, on that note, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us here on from Mount Carmel. This is Moriah. Certainly 7 years cannot be covered in a program of 40 minutes, but we've tried to the best of our ability to capture some of the key moments in Moriah's history. I'd like to thank you personally for being the keeper of the knowledge, and I'm hoping that you will continue to do so with the vigor that you bring to this role. And on that note, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight on from Mount Carmel. This is Moriah. I'm reminding you that this program was produced by Nicole Cutler, and I'm Ethan Kushner, chair of Kehilat Moriah in Haifa, wishing you all shalom ulihitraot.